strict message a little while ago about attendance. So please do keep in mind that attendance is important for your progress. And we do take attendance every week for every session. So we take attendance. So for Tuesdays, for example, we take attendance in the morning and then we take a separate attendance in the afternoon. So if you have an important reason for missing out, please do let us know. So I'm gonna just take a couple of minutes here to write down your names, and then we can get started. I would kindly ask the first group to just prepare their presentation in the background. So what did you think about the presentations this morning? I think Enriqueta's presentation was particularly interesting. Great presentation, okay. I think we're missing one person, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, we are missing one person this week. No, we're not. You're welcome. Okay, that's everybody. Nice. Very nice. Does anybody want to turn on their camera so we can say hello? Oh, there we go. Hi. Hello, nice to see some faces. Oh, you have an interesting background there, so I can't see your colleague in the back anymore. I can only see you in the background. Oh, nice to see your faces. Hello. So could you find any aspects from the presentations today that could potentially be useful for your work, either for your studio work or for your dissertations? Feel free to jump in. Did you find yourselves asking the question, what does this have to do with architecture and urbanism? No? Nobody? Okay, then. I guess we can move on to this week's presentations. Let me just open up the list here. Group 4. Okay. Will the first group please come forward and share their presentation? And also, if you have a handout, which you should do, please share it with us in the chat.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I have upload the handout on the Moodle. Yeah,
Moodle. Okay.
yeah.
If you can share it here as well so that we can have it on
Okay.
hand, that would be great.
Have you seen the PDF?
Yes, I think we got it.
I have sent it in the chat box. Yeah, the
Yes.
handout.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And shall we start now?
Yes, please.
I'll share my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
So we will start to make the presentation about our books, the Situation City, and um, the speaker is me and my group mate Kevin Go. And so the first part is our content is uh, can can be divided into three parts. The first is the introduction and the case extension about the words and the articles the book mentioned, and the last part is the summary and the conclusion. So let's start about the first part is about the background, and this is the map designs from the situation city, uh, including the cover map, the next city from the cover page. So I put this picture into the uh, first one in our point. And the first inclusion, the first introduction, it can also be divided into three parts. The first is the background and about the author and IMIB. So the first part is the book's author is the Simon Chandler, and uh, his his publications study the architectural ideas of the Archigram group, the Situationist, and other experimental practices. He wrote the Situationist City in 1998, trying to search for the situationist ideas among the detritus of tracts, manifestos, and works of art that they left behind. And this picture is the international movement for an imaginist Bauhaus, and the abbreviation is IMIB, a small-scale and short-lived group of European avant-garde artists. It originated from the communication between Esther Joy of Cobra School and Enrico Ban and Sergio D'Angelo, members of nuclear art movement. It focuses on the role of artists in the machine age, such as Wear and Hell, with the intention of improving the old Bauhaus education system. And IMIB was established in 1955. In 1957, it merged with Letterist International and the London Psychographic Association to become the famous Situationist International. And the next is the Cobra. So its name is the initial letter combination of Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. So it's called the COBRA. And the painting style of its school was impulsive and rebellious. Because they were in a special era after the war, they faced difficulties and emphasized unity and cooperation. They rebelled against the Main Street ideology at that time and only allowed surrealism. In the summer of 1956, Esther Joy invited Constant to participate in the Arts and Crafts seminar of IMIB, and he delivered a keynote speech showing his interest in architecture and cities. It was from this time that Constant began to conceive on his New Babylon. Unexpectedly, it took him nearly 20 years later. Constant's urban concept has typical situationist characteristics, hoping that the city can create and accommodate people's pleasant daily life and people can also drift in this space. And this is some of their paints and their painting style, yeah, is like this. And the next part is about the representative, and he's called Enrico Ban, and he's Italian avant-garde artist, many of whose works are related to the nuclear war, often use colleague techniques. And there is some words. And next part is about the Bauhaus Impression International movement. And Astrodroid later learned about the Alphabetist International through Enrico Bay and then established contact with such influential figures as Guy Debord. And on September 29th, Astrodroid finally found Bauhaus Impression International Movement IMBB with Giuseppe Pinot Glazio and Piero Simando in Alba, Italy, and their name was really hard to say. So, and the next part is about the Situationist International and other members. On July 28 in 1957, AMB merged with uh, Alpha Baptist International and London Psychological Ethnography Association to establish the Situationism International, which has been magnificent since then. And the next part is about the Constant. And another thing that must be mentioned is Constant. And the energetic Dutch artist has deep involvement in Cobra painting school and situationism, but it may only be a passing by for the IMIB. Constant is proficient in all kinds of art. In addition to painting and sculpture, he even dabbles in music. In the summer of the 1956, Esther John invited Constant to participate in the Arts and Crafts Seminar of the MIB. He delivered a keynote speech showing his interest in architecture and cities. It was from that time that Constant began to conceive of his new pavilion. And so the new Babylon is about part three in our books, and that's uh, about the background and the author about the book. And so let my groupmate to show the next part, the case extension.
I'm sorry, wait a moment. Hey, hello, I'm Kevin, and I'm going to tell you what's next. Uh, Part two of this book explains more closely the situationist description of new urbanism. They were nostalgic for a time where architects and designers had pursued uh, spontaneous, open-ended experiment. They want to make of a daily life a creative, playful, and surprising experience. Said described Guy and his co-worker uh, reverse those different areas of Paris. In this place, they discovered many situations and explored new codes. For that, they filmed and photographed a memoir. I found three case extensions in these books. Firstly, uh, mm, the Cobra's first attempted at urban planning was a very contemporary, a novel concept for a city of 3 million people. The plan was the first presentation. The plan was the first practiced at autumn salon uh, in Paris in 1922 and proposed a city of the future based on uh, this relation. Um, this relation on comparison plan began with an adjacent flat, open and free of buildings. The second case extension is that Debord presented with such Asianist map of Paris and the Royal of the Derive. The Royal of the Derive is an unplanned genre source a landscape, usually urban, in which participants drop their everyday relations. Uh, those solo derived are possibly devoid indicates that the most fruitful member arrangement consists of several small groups of 2 or 3 people who have reached the same level of awareness. Since cross-checking these different groups impression makes it possible to arrive to at more. objective conclusions. The derived scores include studying physical graphics and emotional disorientation, both of which lead to the situation. The last case extension was the 1960 book, The Image of the City by Kevin Leakin. Starting with two key questions. What does the city's form actually means to the people who live there? And what can the city planner do to make the city's image more vivid and memorable to the city driver? The city is not merely uh, considered as a thing in itself, but rather linking exposed how the city is perceived and by people in ways that amount to the creation of a mental map. The findings are developed into the zero of imageability with element recent and therefore comparable. Okay, uh, my friend Hanfan will make a summary.
So it's the last part of our presentation is about the summary and conclusion. And it's about 5 parts about the book, and I have put the summaries in the handout in the chat box, so you can download it, and if have any questions and add-ons and those you can uh, uh, question us or jump out to discuss with us. And it's all about our presentation. Thank you for your listening. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. I would first like to open the floor to your colleagues for them to either make comments on the presentation. So thinking about the presentation, what could have been done better, what could have been said that wasn't said, what you thought of the presentation style, and if you have any questions about the text in particular. So anyone who wants to come forward, please do.
Sorry, I accidentally kicked myself out of that meeting there. Yeah, sorry. So I missed when you started talking, Demetrius. Sorry.
Right. So I said, no worries. So I said that I'm going to open the floor to everybody else, and I'm asking them to evaluate their colleague's presentation and to say, what did they, are they missing something from, because everyone should have read the text, but even if you didn't read the text, what did you think about the presentation? What could have been done better? What could have been done differently? What did you like about the presentation? What more would you like to learn about the particular topic and the book? and if you have any questions that are specific to the reading. So please, I'm giving the floor to everyone who has not presented today.
Hi there.
Hi.
I want to ask a question. As far as I know, the image of the city theory of Kevin Lynch is that people know the city because of the observation of the city surroundings, especially the city's symbols or the signals. So, what do you guys think about the relationship between this kind of theory to the reality of the observation of the city, and also what's the limitation of this kind of theory? That's all.
So let me think a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So about the imagery of the city of the Kevin Lynch, I think, in my opinion, for any particular city, there's a public impression, which is the common part of many individual impressions, or there are a series of public impressions, each representing a large number of urban residents. Urban design should be used to strengthen these impressions, not weaken them. And in book, as is mentioned, these impressions are summarized into five elements: and path, age, district, node, and landmark. So I think these five elements or more elements consist of the city, and each part of the element each element can be divided. They should be uh, cooperated together and combined and linked with each other, uh, so the city can be worked better. So it's my opinion about the book of the Kevin Lynch, The Imagine of the City.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that? Also, another kind of maybe overarching question is, what do you think about the text? Did you talk about the limitations of the text? I know that you asked that question. Are you satisfied with the answer?
Not really, because that's why I'm asking.
So, guys, you're up again. What do you think? What are the limitations?
I read the answer on the book.
You come up with this now?
I find it from the network, from the internet.
Okay. Can you tell us what it says in your own words? Because the purpose here is for you to understand the limitations of the book.
Okay, let me think about it.
Or you can tell us which points you agree with from this critique. I mean, it's an interesting critique. It's a good critique of Kevin Lynch, but I want to know what you think, not what someone on the internet thinks.
I'm thinking about some the limitations about uh, the image of the city, and I think the limitations of the understanding of the role and connotation of urban image are also directly reflected in the limitations of the interview about the book, and the researchers put too much in emphasis on the material space factors and ignore the social and cultural factors. And in fact, there are many factors that can affect the urban image in the mind more than the material space factors. And for example, in our daily life, the characteristics of people and their activities can effectively define the spatial image. The reason why the university campus can be significantly more useful than other spaces is not because of the material environment with high green rate, but because the campus is full of young students and teenagers, full of useful atmospheres. So I think some elements may be more important and as the society develops and the five elements in the image of the city of Kevin is uh, can be more development by the people in the and the human being in the society, not the five uh, physical elements in the book. So that's my opinion about the limitations about the book.
Okay, great, thank you. Yudi, are you happy with that? With your colleagues' reply?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
I think we've only got about 5 more minutes before we've got to move on to the next text. So does anybody have a pressing question? And also, while we're waiting for people to come up with questions, maybe the presenters, you can tell us what you thought about the text yourselves. I know, Hang Pang, you just talked about limitations, but maybe in a more kind of overview or kind of top-down view, you can tell us what you thought or what you think about the movement and Sadler's depiction of it, of course. Does anybody want to jump in?
How would you say, so this is a bit of a tricky question, but I think that if you read the text, you might be able to respond. So your colleague talked about the lack of awareness of the social in the analysis of Kevin Lynch's theory. How does Guy Debord's Derive compare to that? all he does is talk about the social. So how would you compare that to Kevin Lynch? Come on, guys. We read the text. Okay, if not, I'm going to move on to the next presentation.
Let's do it.
Hi.
Hello.
We will give the presentation, and maybe we set the handout in the text box.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, there's handout, and I will share my screen. This one. And the book we read is called the New Urbanism Towards an Architecture of Community. And this book was published in 1993. And the author of this book is Peter Katz. And in the 1990s, the concept of new urbanism was still little known. And when Katz learned about new urbanism, he has been a leader in promoting innovative approach to community planning for more than 20 years, and he was the founding executive director of the Conference on New Urbanism, which called CNU, and it played a catalytic role in the launch of new urbanism. And during his tenure, CNU passed the charter and received the first grant and began to establish a strategic partnership with the housing and urban development sector and host the first international conference. And in the half part of the book, three chapters are used to describe the three key points of the new urbanism. And the first part is the region, is the scope of new urbanism, which pays attention to both local area and urban areas as a whole. And in general, the goal of the new urbanism is to apply the best urban design to the region and the neighborhood, and apply it to the new background and the new scale. And the next part is about the neighborhood and the district and the corridor. Uh, Although the names of neighbors may be different, but there is a broad consensus on their substantive composition, whether the neighborhood unit or quarter proposed by Leo Creer, or the traditional neighborhood development, also called TND, or the transit-oriented development, which called TOD. They all have the similar properties. And the functional areas refers to the urbanization area with the special functions. Although each functional area will not have all the activities necessary for the complete community, it's not a single active area in the strict sense of the suburbs. And the traffic corridor undertakes the task of connecting and separating neighborhoods and functional areas at the same time. It can be formed naturally or created artificially. It's an urban element with visual continuity and surrounding by its surrounding functional areas and neighborhoods and provide access. Uh, at the last chapter, the first is a street, and the street is not the dividing line in the city, and but it's a space and a passage for public activities. And the second element is a block. It's the place where the architectural texture and the public area can be present in the city. As a multifunctional and async tool, traditional blocks can form a mutually beneficial relationship between people and cars in urban space. And the last element is building, which is the smallest growth unit in the city. Its proper layout and positional relationship determine the characteristic of each settlement. And about the planning the American dream. In the past 100 years of suburban construction and urban planning, many people have been liberated from crowded and unhealthy living conditions. However, emerging land use and transportation patterns have also brought new problems, and the undisciplined spread of low-density suburban development is undermining the quality of the suburban life. In the operation of new urbanists put forward seemingly simple reasons to those problems. Its principle is that community planning and design must mention the position of public interest above private interest. And regarding the application of the new urbanism, there are two important ways. The first is on the left, it's Peter Karsop's regional planning task, the transit-oriented development. It's also called TOD. as it has the basic template to guide growth to the discrete nodes, allow the light rail and bus network. On the right is Andres Duany and Elizabeth Platzbeck proposed the traditional neighborhood development. It's also called TND, and compared with the capsule's mast, this mast used on a smaller scale have more detailed provisions and changes according to local conditions, and rely less on regional planning and emphasize the importance of public transport. And with increasing dissatisfaction with the congestions, development of a sensitive area, house price, air quality, and other issues, public institutions are being forced to take action. Development is good, but citizens often vote against development plans because they expect that development will only make the quality of life worse. Many communities are taking measures to limit or even stop development. New urbanists believe that the best way to change the pattern of the suburban development is to change the rules of the game. They focus on formulating subdivision laws and regulations, zoning norms, and regional plannings, as well as reaching the consensus necessary to win the grassroots class and build a political recognition of their plans. And on the perspective of new urbanism, where the design principle embodied in new urbanism are likely to shape new communities for years to come. Their impact on people's living is less certain. In general, this campaign at best makes the public's attention more focused on how the design of our community can have a very realistic impact on life. If the emergency of those projects can stimulate more extensive and lasting public discussion on the nature of American communities, and create a dynamic alternative to replace the current automated and private development mode. Then the new urbanism may really begin to reshape the American dream. And the next chapter is establishing the urban pattern, and it's introduce a series of new community planning projects, and I will choose to representative project to introduce. And the first is the Laguna West. It's located in California. It appeals the capsule's TOD principle for the first time, and the main focus of its master plan is the tall center, uh, include public and commercial purpose, as well as various forms of medium and high-density house. The oblique boulevard connect this dense central area with the secondary area of the surrounding low-density single-family residential. And a lake separates the two islands. Those two islands is the lake provide a medium density residential area. And Laguna West's main recreational area face water on three sides. The park, swimming crater, and running track are shared with a nearby school, and the block in the center of the town has both residential and commercial use. Laguna West density housing is centered around two subdivision plaza with the city hall and daycare center located in a large municipal park. Laguna West converted water access and lakefront view are balanced between public use and private development. In conclusion, Laguna West innovative planning philosophy has helped it gain a high-end segment of customers in the local real estate market. And independent survey showed that 84% of the community residents preferred the walk-based design to the traditional layout. And the next is Kentland. It's located in Gaithersburg, 37 kilometer northwest of Washington, D.C. It has been recognized as a real town composed of distinctive neighbors, in line with the classical American traditional. And it's the first time to apply TND principle to, to a real and a running community. Um, the community consists of 6 neighbors, each of which combines elements of residential, office, municipal, cultural, and racial functions in order to improve the diversity of population age and income level. Various houses of different type and size are planned here. In time of economic hardship, the project leads to financial restructuring of the development. Despite the change in ownership, the design team's intentions continued until the steady completion of the town of the Kentland. And next, please Wang Hao to tell the following content.
Hi, I will continue to finish this presentation. And through several cases of Zhangzheng, we can find that the planning method of new urbanism has a positive impact on the generation and construction of suburbs. What I like to do now is introduce how new urbanism benefits the reconstruction of cities and communities. What's meant by reconstruction is the adaptation of the old urban fabric. It is necessary because decisions made in the past imposing powerful restraint on the future. The location of buildings, of streets, and of highway systems impose a measure of permanence on the front of community. And the first case is a project at Riviera Beach. In the late 1980s, locals think the kind of high-rise beachfront development which the developers envisioned can only be enjoyed by the richest citizens. This was seen as a destructive to the city's future vitality, seeking to improve its image and economic base. Riviera Beach's Community Redevelopment Agency led a citizen-driven planning effort. One key element of the master plan is that it established 9 distinct neighborhoods, each with its own defined age and center. Another element of the plan was the restoration of Broadway as the city's main street. Local blame the increased width turned what was once the city's main street into a high-speed motorway. As we can see on the right, excessive setbacks and parking requirements force building back from the street and away from each other. By contrast, Riviera Beach's proposed urban code aligns building of varying size with the street age, relocates parking to the rear of each lot, and introduces a continuous arcade above the sidewalk. This slide shows the side of the modified road. Another case is at Rio Vista West. The character of Rio Vista West with its large expanses of pavement and billboard architectural seem at odds with the kind of walkable neighborhood envisioned in San Diego's new TOD guidelines. The Rio Vista West master plan adds significant residential, retail, and public land used to an existing high-rise office and hotel development just east of this site. These 2 slides show us the planning standards for Rio Vista West. Architectural guidelines for this and other apartments in the community call for an active street age, porches, porticos, bay windows, and separate entries for ground floor units are required in this standard. The third case is in Lake West. The new Lake West master plan proposed a comprehensive transformation of this project into a functioning mixed-use community. The network of streets within the existing West Dollars housing project interrupts the surrounding grid of city streets and blocks. The master plan of Lake West defines a new urban structure of small-scale street blocks and residential squares. A proposed lakefront town center has been integrated into this fabric. Proposed infill buildings and project wings at the end of block help to contain the perimeter that separates public and private spaces. And next, Lake West planning team used only 4 block types, each result from a different modification of the existing building pattern. They include a short block, as you can see on the down right, and a long block, a L block, and a H block. The architecture of community written by Vincent Scully is the concluding chapter of this book. He summarized the content of this book and introduced his extended thinking. Firstly, he thinks that the book's title, The New Urbanism, cannot help but seem overly comprehensive. The new suburbanism might be a truer label. The major issue of this book surely has to do with reshaping that sprawl of automobile suburbia into communities that make sense. And towards an architecture of community, the book's subtitle is what this book is primarily talk about. And secondly, the modern architects of the international scale want to be as free from all constraints, free from everything which had always shaped and limited architecture before. He states that their architecture linked not at all with the city or with human living on any same terms. This architecture celebrates the freedom from history and time, but we could not make a community out of them. This is what the author mentioned, the relationship between architecture and community. Architecture is fundamentally a matter not of individual building, but a shaping of community, and that is done by the law. He thinks the community needs such a law. Furthermore, the author also mentioned the problem of housing for the poor. That is where community is most needed and where it has been most destroyed. He argues that the poor should have the same right to enjoy the new cities and suburbs. This slide is a photo of the contributors of this book, and now I like to talk about some of my thoughts on this book. The concept of urban center and communities around the world have many similarities with the new urbanism of this book. Communities need to take into account housing, employment, transportation, education, culture, healthcare, leisure, and so on. However, in practical application, new urbanism can only be used as a reference because each city has different natural conditions, built environment, population, and financial level. For example, in populous countries like China, some central cities are still desirable places for rural people who believe that heavy commuter traffic will make life in the suburbs inconvenient, and the suburbs themselves, they do not have the same facilities and services as urban centers. This is a problem that this book ignores. Another point of view that I cannot completely agree with is the author's criticism of the deconstructive modern architecture. In my opinion, good design should have both the wisdom to deal with problems and the foresight to the future. It's not wrong to solve problems according to the new urbanism in physical design, but it cannot be said that the freedom of modern architecture is completely wrong. Due to the pursuit of profit and efficiency, art and ideas and thought in society has been restricted, and cities and buildings have become more and more boring and lose themselves. The significance of modern architecture lies in breaking social rules and exploring art possibilities. It's not just the style of design, it's a progression of thought. For example, which is also ignored in this book, the rapid development of technology will also affect urban planning. Maybe it's Maybe it's because it published in 1993. The book clearly failed to take into account the vast amount of advanced technology like artificial intelligence, driverless car, network-based stations. This all affect the structure of the community and the relationship between people. For example, the development of driverless car technology may affect transportation systems in cities. This may also affect the community resident for communication and shopping.
Has that frozen for other people as well? Sorry, sorry, you froze there.
We may even live underground because of pollution. We may break gravity and live in the sky, which may require us to adapt to a new urban mode, which bring
Ow. Hi. You froze
that
there.
uh
You were
okay,
sorry. You were talking about
about
driverless cars.
driverless cars. Okay. Uh Yes. For example, the development of driverless technology may affect transportation so that the TOD principle mentioned in this book it no longer applies to cities. The development of the internet may also affect the needs of community residents for communication and shopping. And who knows, we may even live underground because of pollution. We may break gravity and live in the sky, which may require us to adapt to a new urban mode. Which brings us back to the second point. We need to we need the free thought of modern architecture instead of completely deny it. That's our that's our presentation for today. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. Thank you.
Hi Zhang, what about you? What are your views on the text? Because I know Hao has said what he thinks, but what do you think?
Uh, the conclusion is about our tools to put out it, and we uh, talk about the different parts, and he talk about the last part. I talk about the front part.
But you haven't talked about what you think about the text in general.
Yeah, I mean, we we have a talk, and we have uh put out some views, and the views is our think let's Wang Hao to talk about with you guys.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. So what are your views on the text?
He means that read this book together and we have talked about our own thought and we came up with three thoughts to share with everyone. So these three thoughts mainly is our thought, not my
Okay.
own thought.
Okay. So despite that, I mean, obviously you see specific kind of limitations in the text, but despite that, what did you think about the text itself?
Mm, I think the new urbanism this is based on the American country, and but it's like more suitable for the developer country, but it's not suit for all countries in the world. Like
Why do you say that?
cause in some developing country, they 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 just need to develop the big city, but they are not put so much power or some money to develop the suburb area. Uh, but in American, uh, they have a uh, very good development, and there's uh, source can be uh, put in everywhere like a suburb, so the people can live in suburb and they have same life quality as in the urban area. But in some developing country, they maybe the suburb area, they have a very bad life quality.
So essentially, I'm just going to repeat back what I understand from what you said. Okay.
Yeah.
So you are saying that this only works in America because there's a kind of standard level of investment in the city and in the suburbs, but it doesn't work when there's no investment in the suburbs but investment in the city. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
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 Okay. And are there any other kind of things that you think, oh, by the way, everybody else, I expect you to jump in and ask questions as and when you see fit. So when you do that, just put on your camera and unmute yourselves. But I'll just ask you a few more questions. So obviously you've seen limitations with regards to kind of development and non-development in the country. Are there any other limitations you see of the text? Are there any other things that are happening in cities kind of in the last 10, 15, 20 years that you see is an aftermath of thinking around texts such as the New Urbanism?
Yes, this book is based on the motorway, which is all about car, all about road. So he has two principles to deal with the suburb areas planning. So I think maybe with the technologies, the car and the transportation may change, and the suburb, the planning will also change because of it. And I think the policies and the population and the environment in each city is different. But the principle, we can use it as now. But we have to also think about what if the suburb no longer needs cars or road or transportations. What can we use from this principle?
Yeah, but isn't the text saying specifically that the suburbs shouldn't have cars or should have very limited cars? It's all about this kind of urbanism where you create different kind of neighborhoods, right? Because you said specifically in you and Zheng's kind of appraisal of the text, you were talking about things like driverless cars and the internet, which when was this book? When did you say this book was written again?
Excuse me.
1994.
So 1994, 3 years after the essential invention of the internet beforehand. So obviously they wouldn't have known about things like this. But extrapolating these kind of theories into the world that we see now, can you see any ways in which this has been extrapolated or even expanded in its definitions so that it is relevant in today?
Yeah, like TOD or TND principle. It's like using motorway to deal with suburbs problems. And like there's some cities in America or China which is very big and convenient with very fast internet. They may not need like a car, but it can still use transportation, you know. So I think there's something we can learn from the reference, to use it as a reference, not whole study, not all accept.
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of when you're reading all these texts, everybody, I think that's very much a framework in which you've got to read the text with. You know, a lot of them are 20, 30 years old, you know, so kind of taking them with a pinch of salt and understanding that time has moved on since then is a very important factor. But one of the ways in which new urbanism is really kind of interesting in today's day and age is, have you guys heard about the concept of the 15-minute city? Yes? No?
No.
Okay, so it's essentially what it says on the tin. You know, creating cities that you can essentially do everything you need to do in a 15-minute kind of radius of where you live. So, I mean, I think if there's one thing that you guys can kind of take away from this is the understanding that the creation of these different kind of neighborhoods with different kind of characters is something that's been happening since the last kind of few hundred years, you know, and the new urbanism is probably the most successful kind of semi-recent kind of example of this. And it's all it does is people just repackage it every few years and kind of resell it as this place. And you see it because when you're like living in a city, I mean, I take it both you guys are in Manchester.
Yeah.
Whereabouts are you guys living in Manchester?
Near the school.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Near Retail.
Okay, so
Circle Square.
Right. Okay. So, for example, my old practice designed that square, right? And it's got a very kind of specific kind of character and a very specific kind of feel to that. That's very different than if you go a bit further north into the city, and that's got a very, very different character. If you go south to kind of the student areas, those have also got very, very different characters. And that, I think, is one of the biggest things that comes out of kind of new urbanism and something that really should be taken into consideration. Should we open up the floor to your colleagues? Has anybody got any questions? I leave the floor open. I'll wait for you guys. Hi. Welcome back. We've just finished the text and we've talked about kind of the possible kind of extrapolations of new urbanism to kind of more contemporary, well, towards contemporary kind of derivations of the text.
Mhm.
And I've just opened up the floor to the rest of the colleagues.
Great.
I'm going to start calling people's names out. Are we literally going back to primary school, guys? Who feels like experiencing some trauma from the hands of me? Okay, I'll give you guys 2 more minutes and then we'll start calling names out.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I have some questions, and uh, I admit that the mode of the transportation will develop by the society, and but how to solve the traffic problem from the perspective of the new urbanism? Uh, yeah, it's about my questions. For example, the cities in China, like Beijing, Shanghai, has a lot of traffic jam and traffic problems. So I like to know how to solve this kinds of problem from the perspective of the new urbanism.
Just like thank you for your asking. Just like John
Mm.
Jung said before, this book is mainly
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about the new urbanism in America, in developed cities, in which suburbs they need transportation, right? But
yeah,
like you said, in China, the crowded traffic transportation is not mentioned in this book. It's not about the traffic. It's just about a urban planning method, based on
yeah, yeah,
transportation, not solving the problem of traffic problem. It's more about relationship in community citizens.
Zeng, are you satisfied with that answer?
Maybe I can get my answer from the related books or reference. Yeah, maybe some cases about the developing country and policy and yeah, I may find around other reference. Yeah.
Mm, Hi. I have a few questions. So here they talk about region, neighborhood, district corridor. I'd like to know what are the similar properties that you guys were speaking about, and or what are the properties that makes them unique from each other. And also, Hang Fan, he asked about the TOD. Can we use that specific um, theory to reduce the traffic problems and implement them to in the developing nations like China, India? And also, I'd like to ask that wouldn't that be a hypothetical situation of thinking this about the flying cars and the fastest internet back in the 1994 when the author was literally writing the book? there are many questions, so should I repeat the questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. So the first question is that you spoke that there are similar properties that for the region, neighborhood, district, and corridor. I would like to know what are the properties that make them unique from each other or stand out, or how can you differentiate between these?
Mm, uh, in general, the street and you mean sorry, wait a minute. Uh, you just mentioned the uh street and block and building, right? Or
Yes.
yeah,
No, the region, neighborhood, district.
or region, neighborhood, and okay, and the traffic corridor. Uh, these three elements, they uh they have a different level of the urban planning, and the neighbor is like area, uh, and the uh, it contains many functions like function area or residential or some uh, like this, and the traffic corridor is how to connect the different neighbor or different functional area. So it's there's a relationship is connected by the traffic corridor to connect the functional area or neighbors.
Okay. And the second question is like um, transit-oriented development. How can it be implemented in a developing nation to reduce traffic problems? The same question.
Uh, you mean the TOD, right?
TOD, yeah.
TOD. Uh, uh, TOD. That's beginning with the it's more applied for the new planning neighbors like a new suburb planning, and it need to uh, organize the for people to walk in within 5 minutes in the neighbor, and they can go to the every functions for basic life. So it's more like a walkable city, area like that.
Oh, so these are for newly planned cities and not for
Yeah,
which are already existing.
yeah,
It's like to make it more convenient for people to walk into the destination to buy things, to enjoy things. Not yeah.
Okay, so like encouraging people to use public transport.
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. I
Hello.
want I want to ask a question.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
like in my opinion, like transit in TOD refers to the public transportation, and the TOD theory has been widely used in China's urban planning in recent decade, but as far as I know, the most of them are related to new real estate projects. I think the real estate projects are only a small part of the TOD theory. So what do you think about it? And uh, would that lead to some new kinds of city problems?
Uh, I think the TOD applied in the China use estate project, and it I I am not sure about those project location, but I think it might be in some suburb area to create a very big neighbors, and they they don't depend on the uh, city center area, and they can have a basic life there, like they can have school or some shopping functions there. It's a very uh, good way to uh, for the city development, because it can reduce the some congestions in the city center to to develop those projects.
But you know what I'm thinking? I think the TOD principle in China, they almost create another city center, you know, to build a kindergarten, to build a primary school. It just like create another city center. It's not like a suburb, which is
It's like a totally new district.
yeah, it's totally different from city center. But in China, it's similar to city center. It's like uh,
Yeah.
how can I say? I think it's just because the policy and the built environment, the natural conditions and population and financial level, they are all different. So just like I said, um, if we want to use the urbanism to plan a suburb or a city center, we need to consider all the patterns, you know.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Are you satisfied with those answers?
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to join us?
I still have a doubt that how do the suburbs get connected with the city center using TOD?
Uh, they will set the uh, bus line to connect them, and the people uh, maybe they not need to drive the car, but instead of use the public transportation, or also some like train station in the uh, new planning suburb area.
So these new planned suburbs and the existing city center, how is the transport like connected? If you know, I mean,
Sorry.
like the already planned city center and the newly planned suburb, how do they get connected? The already existing transit and the newly planned one.
Mm.
You know, commuter, like the people live in the suburb, they are not they are not same with the like countryside or something. maybe live in the suburb, and when they have to go to work, they took public transportation to work in city center, and in weekend or in night time, they just leave suburb and use a so and the TOD means that they can walk during the nighttime or during the weekend time. They can walk to the big supermarket nearby or hospital or schools, just like the facilities for people.
Okay.
Okay, so let's think about this a little more critically, shall we? Those are some really great questions, Projecta, so thank you. So when you have an existing city center and you have sort of an up and coming suburb, right? It becomes really, really difficult to connect to connect new infrastructure to existing infrastructure, right? Whether that has to do with an already existing transit system, whether that has to do with new roads, because cities are not planned with the future in mind. Very rarely in practice does planning happen with 20, 30, 50 years, taking 20, 30, 50 years into account, or what happens with, in the future. They rarely take that into account, because when a plan starts to develop and these ideas start to develop, especially large scale planning, city planning, large scale transportation planning, they think 5 to 10 years ahead. They take 5 to 10 years to get planning permission, to start being built, to get the documents, to get planning, technical documents for all the companies to come together and to actually start building these things. So when an infrastructure project is already on its way to being built, it's already behind. It's already not efficient. And that happens with many, many, many large infrastructure projects. So I think those are some critical questions to ask. And I would say that one way of looking at them is really kind of contextualize and zoom in very, very specifically to individual cases to see how to solve. And it's important to try to remember that we're not trying to solve world problems here. We're trying to analyze how cities work. So when we're asking these questions, it's not necessary that we have straightforward answers. We're not going to have straightforward answers, and that's okay. It's important to kind of take those into account and to see, right, so let's take an example. What's happening here? Why is it happening this way? What is the political context? What is the cultural context? What are some of the technical issues? For example, something that I presented this morning, that I talked about this morning, there were, political issues, there were planning issues, and there were technical issues at stake as well. And each case is different. Although there are similarities, each context is going to be different. It's going to be different politically, culturally, environmentally, technologically. One piece of technology might work in China, but it might not work in India for different reasons. So I think it's key for us to look at those reasons why. And of course, every suburb is different and every city center is different, even though they do have similar traits.
That's also why it's really, really important to attribute, well, not to attribute, to associate these theories to your home contexts, you know, because it shows not only an understanding of the ideas that are being spoken about, but it shows that you have an understanding that these theories have limitations.
Especially if they were written like 30, 40, 50 years ago. Like, oh my God, it's so different to what is being written today. Because if you notice, like in the previous presentation, we talked about Kevin Lynch, the difference between Kevin Lynch and Guy Debord. Guy Debord talks about, and this is a very, very kind of key text, if you're interested, the Society of the Spectacle, Guy Debord. And it's a phenomenological text, but nevertheless a quite interesting and important one. It talks about the perceptions. It talks about perceptions of people. So it's very different approach to Kevin Lynch's spatial understanding that doesn't include any cultural context and doesn't take people into account. It's on the other side of the spectrum. What we would like is to kind of bring those together and find a healthy medium where the material, the spatial, and the kind of, yes, thank you, Iwa, and the spatial coexist with the social. The social is not separate from these things, and it cannot be taken as separate from these things. Because the cultural, the political, the spatial, the material, all of these things, they co-evolve and they live together. And they constantly move. So there's these relations are constantly in flux. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for an analysis of these relations. How do these things work together? How does planning work with politics, and how does one affect the other? So these are really important. One way, sorry, Ewa, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you mid-sentence there, go.
No, I was going to say that a very, very simple way of looking at this is to take a material, take steel, for example, and think about a construction. So if we think about the construction of the bridge, one thing that we can take into account and we can start investigating is, where does the steel come from? Where is it produced? Where are the materials mined? Where do they come from? How much do they cost? And how does that affect the construction of that particular bridge? And is that country willing to pay for the cost? Now steel has gone up, I think, like 30% over the past few months. Like, it's insane. Like, you can't afford to build shit. It's like people who had, planning permission, they're like, I can't afford that. It's like twice as much now. That also plays a key role in city design and kind of city making.
And essentially that's the essence of the course, right? I mean, it's the kind of interplay between these two, well, not these two, these different kind of aspects of city making that you don't necessarily, when you come on the course, understand that they kind of have interplays and stuff. The building I'm working on at the moment, which is, my client is the City of London, okay? These guys have more money than I care to kind of talk about. A building that I've been working on for the last 6 months, right? Gone through planning. Supposed to be on site later this year. It's not. I don't think it's going to go on site, just because the amount of first of all, inflation, the amount of increase of the price of steel, for example, and these are all things that have very, very material, very, very tangible effects on the creation and the design of cities, and when you start to understand that, suddenly the text is not about the suburbs of San Diego. Suddenly the text is about the kind of planning of that suburb in San Diego, but also the political kind of interplay. Economics kind of comes into that, and just like sociology as well, you know? And when you start to understand that these different instances have far-ranging and lateral-ranging kind of criteria, you're like, oh, maybe this is interesting. Maybe this is more interesting than I've originally kind of thought. That's my view anyway. Any more questions, or should we?
Going once, going twice. You can now or forever hold your peace.
Sold to the people with no cameras on. Okay. Yeah, as I said last week, I think we all agreed that these are great for conversations amongst yourselves. So please attempt to read all the texts that we kind of go through. And thank you, people like Hangpang and UD and Pradaka, for your questions today. And hopefully your colleagues will join in, and we can have a more meaningful discussion next week. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.